Thank you so much, Dr. Rajiv Kumar. There was a sweeping development narrative that you portrayed on these exciting things happening in India and hinting along the way what that might mean for the neighborhood, especially Nepal. I think the topics were very big topics indeed, but you did actually do justice to all the three themes that we wanted to cover. On the range of economic reforms touched on, you gave so many examples on the range of innovative initiatives, public initiatives that are happening in India. Very nice of you to invite Nepali schools to get engaged in the tinkering labs and all that. But that's just one example of the range of possibilities that are slowly opening up. You know, we've read about these initiatives, but I think the challenge going forward is really to get connected at an intellectual level, at a practical policy level on all these things. You ended up with reinforcing something that is quite dear to the Nepali audience. You know, I've characterized our relationship with India and Nepal as one of sovereign reciprocity in a structurally asymmetric relationship. And what does sovereign reciprocity mean? That's up to us to define, given our differences in terms of population size, economic might, the geographical vastness. And you said this does not start with quid pro quo. I think this takes us back to the days of Gujarat doctrine and all that. So it's wonderful to hear from you these old ideas that Nepalese have a degree of resonance with. I also take your point on a lot of obsession on trade deficit. We don't have an overnight solution for this. It's tied to long-term, medium-term production augmentation and all that. Maybe some of the energy export will help redress some of this imbalance. But the trust deficit that you alluded to at the end, I think, is really the key. If that's patched up and that's restored to a level that we have seen in the past, the first visit of Prime Minister Modi here was an extremely exciting period. I think there's a lot going on, and Nepal latching on and becoming partners in this wide range of initiatives that you outlined. So let me now open up the floor. Let's try to be disciplined. I'll try to balance the various geographies represented in this room, left, right, center, but feel free to raise your hand and I'll call you. Okay, we'll start with you, sir. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson, for giving the opportunity to express my views. Likewise, I also thanks to a speaker who presented a very decent speech about Nepal and India relation. I do agree with the neighborhood and border. There is certain differences of the neighbor and border. The neighbor is related to culture, arts, history, and so and so. And the border is only related to the geography. So Nepal and India relation is neighborhood. But sometimes you have also raised the issues. There is some confusion, not only the track 1 or track 1.5 or track 2 in track 2 people level. So I have also raised the issue before the Indian minister. He also agreed that some of the issues did not come in the top level. So how can you create a positive environment, trust building among our nation? My first query. The second query is...
You will have to repeat that, sorry.
So how can you create a positive environment, trust building? Trust building among our nation, neighbor. My second query is I think the China or India trade relation is nowadays in $265 billion. In coming days, it's going to $300 billion. So you are not a landlocked. Nepal is a link land. So how can you take the benefit from that? The last one you have, the speaker has already mentioned about the SAARC. So I think India is the major or regional power in the SAARC. It can play a major role for the development in the region. Just like a SAARC, Japan has a major role for this ASEAN of the region. So what is the reason behind that, and how can you create trust building or create a positive environment to development of this region. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we could probably pool a few questions. I anticipate a fair amount of questions along those lines. Kanakji.
My name is Kanak Dixit. Mr. Rajiv Kumar, firstly on SAARC, when you were with the Center for Policy Research, you actually had started a newsletter titled The SAARCist. So I'm very happy that you have not let go of that particular interest and your conviction that SAARC will move ahead. Now, in that connection, we can leave the geopolitics aside. I would hope that you could use your influence within the most economically powerful country in South Asia, which is India, to move the SAARC economic agenda ahead, which probably starts with connectivity, including with all members of SAARC, including India, Pakistan. That is just a comment. My question is relating to demonetization. As you know, all of us in Nepal follow practically everything that goes on in Indian economy, especially the members in this particular hall would be following all of that. In that connection, in a recent interview, you said that there is no evidence that the slowdown in growth of the Indian economy is due to demonetization, and you actually said that that was, whatever was being said about it was a false narrative on demonetization. So would you tell us where you think demonetization has taken the Indian economy? Could it be like GST, that the future is rosy, given that the present may be a little tiresome? And just one aside is that the tragedy of demonetization vis-a-vis the Nepali economy, because we are buffeted by everything, but in this case, the buffeting was done very, very in terms of impacting the citizens in the Mafasal, that the NRB, that's the Nepal Rashtra Bank, and the IRB, Indian Reserve Bank of India, RBI, were not able to come, as far as I know, to a conclusion for the repatriation of rupees, INR held in Nepal, by the citizenry at large. So that is just a comment, but my question relates to SAARC and its economic agenda and demonetization in terms of the future of the Indian economy, because that will impact the Nepali economy.
Thank you. Dr. Jagdish Pokhrel.
Dr. Kumar, thank you so much. I thank IIDS, Kathmandu University, and Barbara Foundation for this wonderful, to initiate this wonderful discourse. What struck me most was the choice of word neighborhood. You didn't say neighbors, you didn't say countries, you said neighborhood. And then when I tried to link neighborhood, innovation, and connectivity, some questions came to my mind that what kind of neighborhood are you thinking of when you have sort of a design, this big design to transform India? Of course, you did give some thought regarding Prime Minister Modi's saying that neighbors first, but again, from NITI Aayog side, from NITI's side, as a planner, as an economist, what is the kind of neighborhoodness that you are thinking about? And then, of course, the innovations and the examples of interesting things that are happening in India, wonderful. I wish you good luck. Of course, you will achieve your target. But the thing is, given the vastness of India, given the diversity of India, and the number of examples that you have given, to what extent can you actually generalize it? And what would be the implication for sort of implementation aspect of it? That is what bothers me most. Of course, what you are looking at, from what I gathered from your speech, is still the perspective is from Delhi. You are looking at from Delhi, okay? The eyes are top down. What is happening at the ground level? Of course, you did mention the technological information, communication technology, adaptation at the grassroots level, in some way monitoring it from the center, but still, how effective is it? And then, who are you depending on to do these things? Who are you depending on to do these things. Okay? Again, I go back to the concept of bureaucracy, implementation, corruption, leakages, slowness, and everything that affect most of our implementation efforts. That's my last question. And then I thank you so much for your wonderful lecture. Again, this neighborhood concept I find very interesting,
Okay, thank
and
you.
of course for the discourse, and these three concepts, how we link it and how this is going to
Thank you.
affect our country and the neighbors. Thank you so
Let's
much.
close with these questions for this round. I think there's a common thread there on SAARC. How do you, I think you said you were a SAARCist at the outset of your lecture. Given the widespread acknowledgement that SAARC has sort of slowed down, how can we revive this? Demonetization, a concrete question there on how do you really see it as a success? I think recent reports said 99.3% of the old currencies actually went back to the Reserve Bank. Yet we have read about some positive externalities that have come out of this experience. And the Nepali, I think many people are still stuck with the old Indian currencies, and the failure, when you talk about Indo-Nepal collaboration, the fact that we've not been able to cash just very tiny amount of money, 10 crores I see, I think, maybe something can be mentioned there. And issues of trust deficit came earlier. And the last question from Dr. Pokhrel on, can we define neighborhood? Is it distinct from the borderlands or the traditional delineation of our politically defined states? And I think his last bit of question was on all these sweeping initiatives that have been unleashed. How do we ensure that they actually get implemented and delivered, given the well-known problems with our bureaucracies, South Asian bureaucracies? Dr. Kumar.
Yeah. First, let me talk about how to create a positive environment. And this is something that you can't decree it. You can't sort of simply decide, sort of order that you want to have a positive environment. So let's begin. This is something that has to be worked at, and there are certain drivers for that. And I think the drivers for that are essentially, other than one of the main drivers as an economist is improving economic relationship. So if you facilitate trade and investment and commerce and people to work in each other's economies, etc., that improves that builds the positive environment. And here, what you've been emphasizing, connectivity is of course extremely important. The connectivity, the ease of doing business, the ease of crossing borders, etc., I think all of that. And here, so I think, so therefore and my own sort of hunch is that if we continue to build upon the sort of roadmap the two prime ministers have laid down already, there is just no reason to believe that this positive environment will not come about. I think that both sides are now quite clear that they have to create this positive environment for mutual benefit. So I think, but it has to be something that will come about, that will grow.
On it, yeah.
Tourism is going to help in a major way. Many steps have been taken in that regard. The Dharamshala that is being built here, or the Varanasi, Janakpur, Ayodhya Janakpur bus service that started, the Varanasi, Kathmandu air service, all sorts of things. And I think here the biggest sort of achievement will be the day, as I said, when Nepal does become a net energy supplier to India, which is what it should be by all accounts, and rather than be importing energy at the moment, as it happens at the moment in this. And so that I think is the positive. And once that happens, of course, this trade imbalance would also be very largely addressed, because that's the. But then there are other ways of addressing trade also through agro. On the on SAARCist, as I said, I remain. You know that I launched a website and a magazine, a registered magazine, an online magazine called The Sarkist. It only had one A in it and not the two. But you know, the onus is on members who clearly don't see SAARC as a positive sum game, and I think that is where. And let me not say anything more than that at the point of time, because it can only be detrimental and not positive. India is committed to SAARC. India has always been committed to SAARC, and India has also tried its hand at creating better connectivity and better infrastructure and environment with other SAARC members, with as many SAARC members that it can, if you like. So that is, but I think just one thought that I have is that more and more of us should still continue to talk about SAARC. The conversation on SAARC has ended. There is no public discourse on SAARC any longer. I think that is what we need to do, because there are certain issues, whether it is environment or it is the water resources, or it is trafficking in drugs and narcotics and human, or it is border area development. You can't do it unilaterally. You have to do it in a cooperative manner. And the only way to do it is within the region of SAARC, because SAARC is a geographical coherent entity which, although BIMSTEC is a very promising formation, it's still not, and it will become a geographical entity as we go forward, but SAARC is there, and I think we can, I think that it's a pity that I have not been able to give that website as much attention as I should have been doing. But thank you for reminding me, and I think I'll go back and revive it in somehow or the other. So that is what I'll do in my own. On demonetization, I have been one of the few, if you like, but one of the earliest and staunch supporters of demonetization, a very ardent supporter of demonetization. And all the indirect benefits will, I think, come, if you like. All that money that you talked about, 93 or 99%, 0.3, which has come back to the system, is actually now sitting there in designated bank accounts. Mm-hmm. So it's not turned from black to white, it's turned from black to gray. Mm-hmm. And in having turned from black to gray, it is still going to be in the sight of the tax authorities, and that's one of the reasons for which you're seeing the expansion on the direct tax net. But the most important thing is that the measure was a very strong, unambiguous, clear message to the society in India that the whole culture that said that it doesn't matter how you earn your money, but it matters only that you earn your money and then go around strutting about in the society is not acceptable to us in India. And I think that particular draining of the swamp, I think, was the biggest achievement that we did with demonetization. And that has resulted in and will continue to have its repercussions on greater formalization of the economy and a greater openness of the economy and a better deal for those who earn and pay their due taxes rather than those who don't and earn their money otherwise. Now, so that's on a wonderful question on neighborhood, sir. And what is I see, given the new technology and everything else, the neighborhood that I want to define is a little bit amorphous, because the neighborhood, when talked as neighborhood, can extend and remain flexible. So we don't need to. So therefore, the neighborhood, includes India's, attempt at look east or act east, etc. It also could include later on Central Asia, if you like, some of the island republics and so on. But my vision of a neighborhood, South Asia, if you like, is a neighborhood where you have where technology enables much greater economic integration and also social interaction, where borders become places where people meet and interact rather than places which divide societies. Because the societies are not divided. Because there are people living across the border who are pretty much the same they're not very much, they're very different from each other. So I think the neighborhood from here, till wherever, till Yangon or from, the way I define the neighborhood, by the way, South Asia is, I talk about from Kabul to Yangon and everything included in between. So that's the neighborhood. I think we can even extend it further to the Mekong. People have talked about it. But that's the neighborhood, I think, which if we can manage with the help of new technology, with the help of a little bit broader vision, where people's movement, the movement of goods and services, the movement of information and data can all be free and unencumbered, and yet not become, yet remain, if you like, a win-win for everybody concerned. I think that can be achieved. I think we can achieve it with due consideration to security and to other areas. But again, that's something that will have to unfold as we go forward. And I don't, so this is why I don't particularly talk about neighbors, because that then defines it when I talk about neighborhood. If you like. Last one on the implementation. This is why I talked about accountability. And I can assure you that the emphasis on accountability from the ground level upwards is today, unprecedented in India. And this is what this current Prime Minister brings to his office and to his job, which is that he has done, as a Chief Minister in the past, brought this level of accountability from the ground level workers upwards. And thankfully, the modern technology enables you to do it at a very cheap cost, that you can really get feedback from the furthest areas away onto wherever you want to create that accountability. It's just more a matter now of will rather than a matter of the modality. I think modalities are now present for us to be able to do that, and implementation can be achieved, and leakages can be reduced. As I mentioned to you, the direct benefit transfer that we've done through the JAM Trinity, 437 schemes have been transferred already, and about 80,000 crore rupees has been saved by transferring the benefits directly to the beneficiaries' accounts, whether these are pensions or scholarships or so many other things. And we are thinking of now of transferring even the fertilizer subsidy, and maybe later on even the food subsidy through this method. And when this happens, you can imagine that the implementation and the leakages would be minimized as we go forward.
Thank you. I've seen lots of hands. We have limited time, so please be direct and short, and it's always nice if questions actually end with a question mark. So Akhilesh Upadhyay, former editor of the Kathmandu Post.
Thank you, Swarnim. I was at the back, and thanks for noticing. Thank you, Rajiv, Kumar, for your, I would say, laying the Modi government's, how would I say, policy efforts in economic terms. I would have appreciated, of course, you said earlier that there were time constraints. A little bit more expansion on Nepal. How does the growth of India then matters to us? The linkages would have been pretty, if you had elaborated a little more on that. So in the absence of that, let me ask you a question, a bit with comments as well. First of all, the comments, And I'm glad that you also remarked that the trust that's perhaps been was on a slide, let's say. Let's face it, the phrase we use pretty much here is post-blockade, 2015 blockade thing. And the things that India has done recently in terms of, both Nepal and India have done into kind of reinvigorate the ties that were on a low with the exchange of prime ministerial visits, etc. So that's noted. And you perhaps also noted that your prime minister made 4 visits to Nepal. And of course, it was on a high, Nepal-India ties were on a high when he first visited in 2014, but subsequently on a slide. Here is my question. Does India look flat-footed in Nepal that all these initiatives came on the heels of very strong engagement that's shown by China? are you being seen as more reactive than proactive? Would you like to respond to that? Thank you.
Thank you. Purushottam Oza.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, thank Dr. Kumar for your insightful and impressive statement. You have talked about connectivity. Of course, Nepal-India connectivity, a lot of projects are going on. You talked about connecting Kakarbicha through Jalpaiguri and some other cities in Nepal with the Indian railway systems, with the construction of the railway Ishpar between Nepal and India. And the important connectivity project would be linking Kathmandu with the Indian railway system to Rakshaw. It is there. And at the same time, efforts are going on to construct the fast track to link Kathmandu with the southern border, ultimately with the southern border with India. And at the same time, we have the understanding with the government of China, as you know, that the railway connectivity to Kathmandu, all the way from Sigatse, Tibet, and improvement of the road, highway to link the northern border. It is also in the pipeline. So, in the initial, the first speaker from the floor was talking about, of course, the increasing trade volume between India and China. So, it is going on. So, my questions particularly is supplementary to that. In view of increasing connectivity and the projects on pipeline, it is likely that Nepal could be able to serve as the land bridge between India and China. So how do you see this prospect from the Indian side, from the Indian perspective? Will India be interested to use Nepal as the land bridge to reach out to China?
Okay, thank you.
This is my question. Thank you.
Biswas Gauchan at the back. And then Shanta Dikshit. Lots of hands. Please be brief so that we can accommodate as many people as possible.
I heard your mention very carefully about the tinkering in primary grades, and that was very exciting, being an educator. I know that, we have to go to government schools because 80% of our children go to government schools. But the carrying capacity of quality education in government school is very abysmal. And I know till now, Indian Embassy has been helping Nepali government schools construct buildings, but not much more than that. And I think the granting of these things also are not so clear-cut, maybe a lot of politics involved. But I'm just wanting to know from you, what would be the modality of a public-private partnership that would bring really good quality engagement for the children in primary schools, in government schools? If it hasn't been worked out, maybe we need to think about it, but I think this would really then build the trust, make children really aware, and we're talking at very high level now, but the future of Nepal would really rest on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Biswas Gauchan and then Krishna Gyawali, and then we'll go for a second round. I've noted your names.
Thank you, Dr. Rajiv Kumar, for your very insightful speech. And my question is about Indo-Nepal relationship. There are lots of myths about the Indo-Nepal economic relationships. And what we tend to believe in general is that India has disproportionately favored Nepal in every aspect of economic spheres. But the data actually shows otherwise. What I found is that in my research, Nepal annually contributes as much as $15 billion worth of economic contribution to the Indian economy. You take the trade deficit, which is more than 7 billion annually. You take the remittance that is flowing out from Nepal. Actually, all of us here believe that we are one of the largest receiver of remittance, but we are also the largest sender of remittance. And as much as $3 billion goes to India, and we are net deficit by $2 billion, and that's the huge. And by per capita, we are the largest sender of remittance. And you take every space of relationship, you find that we are contributing very high to the economy of India. But in this context, where is this reciprocity? Because you talked about reciprocity, and is that happening? And I think that's where we have to work on. Because I want to put it in the perspective, when Modi came in the power in 2014, during that year, India received FDI of 31 billion, and $20 billion came from all the countries Modi visited in that year. And in that context, $15 billion of annual contribution from Nepal is huge. And I think we have a 15 billion. And
Nepal
contributes every year to
15 billion.
He's adding the trade
And
deficit and the remittance outflows.
Remittance of 3 billion and more than 7
thank
billion.
you, Biswas.
And then we have this, the investment in treasury of government. Actually, most of us don't know that we are, providing the money for the deficit of India to the extent of 2 billion. And another 2 billion is going to the deposit in the banking sector. So, in total, 15 billion is a huge. So what can we expect from India in terms of
Okay, thank you.
economics?
Can you pass the mic to Krishna Gyawali, former secretary in the government of Nepal?
Thank you, Dr. Kumar, for your, I would say, confident articulation of the ongoing progress as well as achievements that you have made, your country has made under the leadership of Narendra Modi ji. I have 3 questions to you. I would like to be short. The first question is that you have touched upon what you said, 3 layers of transition: social, political, and economic. You explained the transition on economic front, but you didn't talk much about social front. I will not tell you to talk about the political transition, but what are your views on managing the social transitional issues arising from people's expectations and aspirations, frustrations and resentments? If we take any evidence going through the social media, we see a lot of responses and rejoinders, which is very anti-establishment and anti-current with regard to the government's reputation and government's views. The second question to you is that you'd agree with me that ensuring a sort of I would say mutually respectful reciprocity, to partly borrow the term that was used by Dr. Wagle, between politicians and bureaucrats is a must to make things happen. But we don't see that quite often. What are your views? What are your tips? What are your insights? Because given your background of working with both the prime ministers representing both political parties, you said you were the advisor to Manmohan Singh also, and now you are working with Narendra Modi ji. You also work with development partner ADB. So what are your advices to improve the relationship between the politicians, political masters, who are supposed to be sitting in the authority of political decision making, and the bureaucrats? That's the second question. Third question is that you also talked about what is a democratic devolution, and you touched upon the true form of federalism. You said things are happening on that front. Again, as you know, we are implementing federal restructuring agenda swiftly. So what are your advices to us in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you. So let's take those 5 questions. Akhilesh Upadhyay was talking about the highs of the 2014 visit of Prime Minister Modi, followed by this post-blockade disappointment. And in recent years, again, his efforts to revive ties, but seemingly in reaction to the overtures made by China in Nepal. So so that's one question. Oza also, can China and India be connected by Nepal? And he's talked about different initiatives. Public schools and the tinkering labs that Shantaji asked about. Vishwas Gojan was trying to, I think, add up the numbers of trade deficit, remittances, the amount of money we put in Indian treasury, and saying that this little known fact that even this poor country actually contributes quite a bit to the large Indian economy, and whether we can get something back. Was that your question? And the final question from Krishna Gemali on, despite these positive developments, we do see these anti-establishment current in the social media. How much of that is overblown? For reciprocity, you do need this deeper engagement on the part of politicians and bureaucrats, and democratic devolution, probably linked with your idea of this cooperative federalism that is maturing in India.
Yeah.
So we'll then go for the third round,
Yes.
and we'll really have to close by 5 o'clock. So I might miss some people, and in that regard, I might exercise my liberty of maybe not calling on KU or the people affiliated with the organizers. But let's go with that.
Yeah. I think India's growth and how it helps Nepal. So the first question, I think it's, to me, at least as an economist, quite self-evident, which is that a growing Indian economy means a potentially larger market for Nepalese exports of all sorts, and maybe also Nepalese investments and things like that. So, and growing Indian economy, given its size, etc., does mean that there is generated, if you like, an economic momentum in this region, which then attracts foreign investors, foreign tourists, and all sorts of other positive the positive externalities begin to get generated, which will benefit Nepal as well. And we can go into specificity, but that's something for the later round. Comparison to China, that this is I think the word used was flat-footed when compared to China. We can't surely compete with China. I mean, they are just too good. So let's not make that comparison. I mean, they are in a different league. We try, given our own constraints of democracy and our own constraints of plurality and diversity, etc., etc. But so I think that it's quite besides the point to compare two such very distinct systems and their responses and their abilities, to be able to do things. So I don't want to even go there. Just to say that I would beg to disagree that whatever one is doing is a reaction to that. Not at all. I mean, it is not, because we realize completely that that every country, every sovereign country has their own objectives, have their own goals, and they work in the way they do. And even in the past, the Chinese have had their efforts and attempts, and whatever they but India had chosen not to respond, if you like, and we chose to do whatever we've chosen to do. So I think this is the Indian approach, and hopefully you will agree that it is now better and it's the right one, is certainly its own. I mean, it's like suo moto and not in response to anything that we would be reacting to, not at all. But whether we are flat-footed or fleet-footed should be compared to our own past rather than to anybody else, because the systems are just completely different. So that's that. On the land bridge, Shigatse, Kathmandu, Raksol, Kathmandu, etc. If they're wonderful. I mean, if all of these things happen, can you imagine the cost of India's exports to China will get so much reduced if we have a land bridge and the train going to wherever it's going to. So there is no way that, but we can't wish. India's wishing whether Nepal would be a land bridge or not is neither here nor there. This is something that will happen, it will develop. We want to improve our connectivity with Nepal. We want to make sure that we get connected with all the state, provincial capitals of Nepal, with their, counterparts on the Indian side. I think it is just extremely important for us to get the rail connectivity to Kathmandu so that, the travel becomes much better. I think it's extremely important for Kathmandu to get much better access to the sea, so that India can play a role there, which is that if you get a corridor which is link the train and then, to the ports, I think that's much better. So that, so therefore, not for me to say whether Nepal will emerge as a land bridge or not. But it is geographically, it would seem that there's an option, but it will depend entirely on what the three countries choose to do on their own, for their own, if you like, their own, for their own reasons and fulfilling their own national objectives. So that's, I think, that much. On the PPP in schools, I would love to discuss it with you, but we could do it more offline because it's something that's not, but the fact is that even if this example of tinkering labs can be taken and some corporate house can begin to fund it, it's not such a big amount of money. It's just, I think 1 crore is what we give to each lab, and we establish them 50% in public schools, no, 70% in government schools and 30% in private schools. So if you could do that, it could start a completely new trend as a part of the CSR, which I'm sure can be done by, by not just government, but other means as well. And because it's something tangible, you can get a, evaluation and a outcome-based evaluation all the time. So something can be done. It's not, it doesn't get lost, in just sort of. On, sir, I'm. How can I say that if Nepal? Let me first thank Nepal for contributing $15 billion to the Indian economy. I think that's the best I can do. If that does seem very much too much to you, I suppose we should make sure that this contribution is less. And if that is what you think would help the Nepalese economy, then that is how it should be. I suppose it's for the Nepalese government and policy makers to decide whether this contribution is too much or too little. The only thing that I could say in response is simply that India would like to contribute as much as it can to the Nepalese economy. Now, you have to tell me as to what are the other ways and modalities in which India can do so. Being in somewhat of a position that I could convert your ideas into action, I would love to hear them. I'll give you my email. Please send them to me as to how India could contribute more to the Nepalese economy and the sort of things, and we can look at that forward. Just the addition of all those numbers that you made, I hadn't read them in economics, but nonetheless, we could discuss them further. But that's on the social transition. I'm not sure what the question was, but the fact is that the social transition, what I had said in general terms, that we have inverted the social pyramid in our country. The people who were completely at the bottom, who were the sort of people who were oppressed for centuries, who were untouchables, who were excluded, who were not part of the society, are today ruling different parts of the country and sustained over a sustained period of time. The Dalits, the oppressed classes, castes, etc., have actually come to the mainstream and are playing a very active role in the Indian social political scene. And I think that's what I meant by the social transition that has happened in this country. Now, there is the other transition which has to be completed, and I'm going to make a very strong statement here, which is that India's approach to religious plurality is perhaps one of the best informed than anywhere else in the world. And therefore we are able to continue with what is called in our system, what Gandhiji said, Sarv Dharma Sambhav, which is what is being practiced. And I've actually met professors from Tokyo University who want to come and stay in India to be able to see as to how this is made possible, and all kinds of conflicts, inherent conflicts, are avoided in our society. And the society does make this transition, whereby in a state like Tamil Nadu, where the Brahmins would not permit an untouchable to come even within a shadow distance of themselves, have found that, and they're happy, they are at peace with the fact that it is the other castes which are now ruling the state, political power for whatever time, and they've also made very good progress in the in economics and commerce. On the last one, how to what was that? The
Politicians.
yeah, the
and bureaucrats.
politicians and bureaucrats. I have so far been neither. So I don't really know the answer to that. I will find out. It's just been 1 year in the government. If I stay longer, I'll come back to you as to how to get back to that. So because at the moment, I'm in that wonderful territory of neither being fish nor fowl. I'm neither a bureaucrat nor a political leader. I'm a mere economist. but once I find out, I'll let you know. But you raised a good question. Let me give you a general answer, which comes to me firstly a little bit from my own very short, if you like, spiritual journey that I'm undertaking, which is that very often it's a matter of very simple and brittle egos and nothing else. And I think it's a short sentence, but if you could actually just think of it, maybe a huge amount, very large percentage of our problems would disappear if you could just try and leave that aside for a minute in the interest of the larger population and welfare of the people. If the bureaucrats and leadership could do that, then I think a lot could be achieved. Thank you.
We have 5 minutes left, so let me call on just 3 speakers. Others will have the opportunity to interact with Dr. Kumar outside. He will be available there. So let me just ask Sumana Srestha, Khadga Kesi, and Dipendra Bahadur Chhetri, the former vice chairperson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kumar. I have 2 questions, mostly on implementation and what it means to Nepal. I know you highlighted how Tata Consultancy helped. Could you give more examples of how the government actually used private sector and in what avenues? Because that will be really meaningful to Nepal. And secondly, besides tourism, when the positive externalities are created, could you identify 2 or 3 sectors that Nepal should be ready to absorb and amplify? Thank you.
Thank you. Can you pass that to...
What's the second one?
So besides tourism, that's going to be created when the GDP of India goes up, when the externalities, positive externalities are created, could you identify 2 or 3 sectors that Nepal needs to be ready to absorb those externalities and amplify those externalities?
Nepal's readiness to avail of India's
Positive growth.
Yeah.
I have a very simple query and observation, starting from the last emotional, political, and academic jargons used by Your Excellency, Dr. Rajiv. What he said that, like, trust connectivity. I want to start from the jargons he used, trust connectivity. Actually, India is being often recited. I don't want to borrow the Farid Zakaria's word of illiberal democracy, however, is the largest democracy, functional democracy. But there are some policy and practice paradoxes between Indian like neighborhood policy and behavior. So far it seems like that India has not proven her credential as a liberal international relations while dealing with the small state in South Asia. She seems more realist while dealing with small state in South Asia, unlike being a liberal. So how can Your Excellency suggest us, how can we build a trust connectivity amid these paradoxes? Paradoxes, I mean that you do have largest democracy, you do have functional democracy. In the meantime, your behavior with the small state in South Asia seems not like proven as a liberal. Thank you very much.
Dipendra Bahadur Chhetri.
Thank you, Dr. Wagle, as well as Dr. Kumar. I have one question and one suggestion. Is India trying to create monopoly market in Nepal? I will just give some example that when we are developing energy in Nepal, India says that unless and until 51% of India or Nepal investment is there, we are not going to buy the energy. That makes very, very, very difficult position in Nepal. That's why very giant projects also are being withdrawn by other potential investors. That is one question. And last week, Commander-in-Chief of India said, Nepal and one of the landlocked country, cannot be drifted away from India's impression or area of impression, let me say. That also supports that India is trying to create a monopsony market regarding Nepal. Just, you already have given the answer about the demonetization, and Kanak Dixit's statement also. I just like to elaborate some and suggest that Central Bank of Nepal has in its vault 70,501,000 denomination notes lying there. Very many times we tried to convince the Indian government, including the Prime Minister of India, but it has become in vain. Why India don't reap the benefit of making its achievement 99.9% accepting the Indian currency lying in Nepal? It is because the regulation between Nepal and India says that each Nepali is entitled to transact 25,000 rupees, Indian rupees, per head. If we count in that way, billions of rupees would be entitled, that should be eligible for get exchanged from RBI. Why
Okay.
don't this opportunity could not be ripped by RBI or Indian government?
Thank you. Mr. Chetri. Now, I must apologize to
How much is lying at the Central Bank of Nepal? 70 million? 70
the
billion?
Nepali stock, 10 crores Indian rupees, apparently
10
is in our
crores.
banking system.
10 crore.
10 crores Indian rupees. It's quite modest, but the
7 crore.
higher limit is up to 1 billion. Yeah. But the 10 crores in the formal system, but we'll get to that. So let me apologize to other speakers who raised their hands later on. Sagar Sharma, Khodga Bista, Yagya Karki, Jimmy Lama, Dwarikanath Dungel, Madhukar Rana, and a few gentlemen whose names I couldn't, Buddhiman Shrestha. So please bring your questions along for, over high tea. We've really run out of time. Let's close with quick responses from the last three speakers. Then we do have a small formality to execute, and then we'll close for the evening.
Some of the other private sector engagements in India, apart from this, is one is I think in the roadway sector, the highway sector that we got, but that's a quite a long-standing PPP modality in India. The other very big one is airports, where some of our best airports are being built by the private sector. The Delhi and the Mumbai and Hyderabad and Bangalore are all being private enterprise, and the government has collaborated with them on very good basis. The final one that I would mention is that there are now the whole thermal power sector is very much open to the private, private investors, and I think something like 30,000 megawatts was added by the private sector. So those are more. I gave that example simply to say that this is a unique case where you're getting public-private collaboration even at the level of the human resources. So that's why. But there are several. PPP in India has been a long-standing tradition, as it were. On the other externalities, apart from tourism, I think you would be able to have a huge, much bigger agro-export market to India. And that Nepal would very hugely benefit because I think, and then also related to that is agro-processed food market to India. And if you, as I heard sometime that there are attempts at growing organic food into Nepal now in some provinces, etc. That could be very wonderful. But the third is, of course, that as India grows, its energy demand will grow, and as energy demand grows, Nepal, if it so chooses, could decide to export its energy to India, and that would be another positive externality for Nepal of India's growth. So that's, and I suppose there'll be others, but I can't, the Nepalese airlines and so on, improving their payloads. On the second question about liberal democracy, credentials, behavior, etc. I could always take the very easy way out, saying that I'm not a political scientist. and so therefore I can't possibly answer that. But let me say simply that at least the present Prime Minister hasn't let any legacy issue come in the way of trying to build better Indo-Nepalese relations. And there have been some in the past, I suppose, unfortunate incidents, etc. But I cannot see India having behaved in any, how do I say, vis-a-vis its neighbors. Well, let me put it just this way, that it'd be very useful for me, for you, sir, to tell me the 3, 4, 5 ways in which India could prove its credentials as a liberal democracy in the neighborhood. And so it'd be better for us to learn from you as to how should India behave in order to prove its credentials, from there. So I think let me leave it at that. And the last one would be what was it, on the demonetization, and you had said some things about monopsony market. Certainly not India's intention. Please export your power to wherever you like, if you can. And I don't think the Chinese big project, which was started here, had any such thing. Because I'm sure about at least that project, because I know the person concerned, and we were at that time talking about it. India had agreed that if that power project came along, they would buy the power because they were interested in the power, in the power that was being generated. So I think to put the onus, and I'm being very frank and blunt here, to put the onus on a failure of any power project in Nepal on the doorsteps of India is probably misplaced. Because I don't think India has ever said that. We will buy power only under certain conditions.
I think you're referring to this 51%.
Yeah, but I don't think that is true. And I don't think that's true at all. And if certain power projects have not been able to come off the ground, it's for reasons other than that. And if that is the case, I would like to see the evidence on that. I would like to see the evidence. The other one that you talked about, the demonetization, look, it's such a small amount, actually, in the Indian context, that it should be taken care of. I'll have to contact the Reserve Bank of India. I was on the board of that, and I'll find out as to what were their technical reasons for not being able to do so. I was on the board until last year, and if this had been brought over to my condition, I could have, but I can still raise that in my position. So let me leave it at that.
Thank you so much. We really have to close. I again apologize to all the other participants who wanted to ask a direct question, but the opportunity remains in a more informal setting. I will not pretend to wrap up this entire discussion, but I think for me, there were two major takeaways. I think Dr. Kumar very eloquently portrayed, presented a very sweeping development narrative on the efforts that are undertaken in India. And he hinted at the different ways in which Nepal can really benefit from that. There is, incidentally, one cross-national evidence that if neighbors, contiguous countries grow by 1 percentage point, it is the case that bordering countries tend to grow on average by 0.4%. So there's all these neighborhood spillover effects. But in the case of landlocked countries, that impact is magnified. It goes up to 0.7%. So this is an empirical sort of stylized fact. So there's certainly a lot of positive benefits from the rise of India, and that very first message that you gave on how you see this march to higher and sustained growth is almost irreversible because of the stars are aligned, and all the reform processes are very substantive. So that, I think, Nepal should be prepared to ride on those gains. The second aspect, especially from the audience, we did hear from a lot on an anecdotal basis, a lot of the historical baggage or incidences or episodes of irritation when a smaller country has felt that the bigger country has not been very sensitive. But the big takeaway for me is really your kind gesture and your humility in accepting and reviewing that all those episodes that might have occurred in the past, the perceived sense of unfairness, can easily be redressed. And this is where the trust deficit and all that can be handled on. So I really thank you for that message that you've very clearly sent to this audience. So let us close with that. Just before we break, I would like to invite the Vice Chairperson of the Barbara Foundation, Mr. Pokhrel, Chandra Pokhrel, and Sharad Adhikari to present to Mr. Dr. Rajiv Kumar a memento of sorts. So thank you very much. On that note, we close this session, and please join us for high tea just outside.